All right, I thought I would talk about INTPs from the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, sort of a mental processing personality quiz and system of analysis into 16 different types of personal relation to information and processing it and so on, and types of action and so on. Now, INTPs are a very, very meta level, top 1 to 2% intelligence population, but it can be a little deceiving, at least initially, because you don't actually type um, that strongly in the intelligence department. It can be difficult to. There's almost a fog that needs to solidify in the INTP's brain, and I would not be surprised if the people that LARP or are furries or something are heavily INTP. There's a certain degenerate sort of quality to INTPs if they don't have a cause or purpose or mission or something like that. And there's a lot of that going on in modern society. On the flip side, I'll get into the strengths when you develop it properly and so on. So, an uninitiated into the mission or calling INTP is very immature, but an INTP that's initiated into the calling can be very, very mature. And it's really just, it's a low floor, high ceiling kind of potential, but it takes longer to develop it properly. But once you get it, you're a master beyond others, basically. So the general concept I have is that an INTP is kind of like able to master any given thing at like 90% effectiveness, and they're polymaths. So they're never going to be the top spot for any given thing, but they're going to be the top 90% or 80% or 70% based on their intelligence and training and education and experience and so on. At any given thing, they put their time or effort or mind into or whatever. So they're going to be polymath potential at the higher IQ levels and so on. So they're almost like a near master of all trades, not just a jack of all trades, but they're not an absolute grandmaster. So they're a master of all trades, not a jack of all trades, but they're not a grandmaster at any given thing. What this means, though, is if you put an INTP towards problem solving once they've developed, or you give them a project for impact that they have to troubleshoot or solve or whatever, they can narrow down almost an infinite set of possibilities to a few strong seeming possibilities. And then that's for relatively new at the game INTPs. New at the game INTPs do require a certain degree of someone else finalizing out of the limited list they provided out of the infinite possibilities in their field of expertise, the other person's. That's how the undeveloped INTP and other personalities operate in some sense. And the INTP serves as a sort of sniffer dog to get the possibilities out of the chaos. And then the other person picks the best one according to their own capabilities and desires. So it's an advisory role. As the INTP progresses, though, they tend to become more able to do things at a satisfactory level themselves. And it's not about depth necessarily, it's about width. But initially, the INTP has to go deep, and then their natural proclivities interlink to broaden their horizons. So, I'll discuss all of this in relation to my own life, to give an example of how it works in some sense. So, basically, there's 5 different personas or personality types in the MBTI that INTPs um, gravitate towards. But there's actually another hidden one, I think, personally, if you force yourself down it, um, which kind of helps develop the rest of it in some sense as well. It's like the one it's not the one you develop naturally into, but it can actually power up your alternative abilities to some extent. So the natural progression of an INTP is something like INTP to having access to ENTJ, then having access to ISFP, and then having access to ESFJ. So that's the natural progression of an INTP. But if an INTP gets a favored status role as advisor to someone and commits themselves to to a project or a vision of something um, that's solid, good, the INTP is loyal to the cause, and gets to work in their domains for the cause in this way, it sort of meta unlocks INTJ. So that's the full repertoire of an INTP. As far as I can tell. Now, in relationships, from as a man who's INTP with ENTJ and INTJ aspects due to my own decisions in a decades long mission to save the West from dark ages. It's sacrificed my relationships and career potential and so on. But I have an inner drive in me that's just frustrated at the moment of ESFJ and ISFP. Now, INTP is the logician or conceptualizer of multiple angles of analyzing problems or concepts or ideas or something, um, and so on, which naturally lends itself to narrowing down but not finalizing possible actions. Um, and in a very helpful quest to do something that lets you be an INTP within it, the INTJ provides a meta um, architect element to it where you're refining your process and mastery and so on. So there's a relation to it. And the INTP and INTJ are somewhat different, where the INTP comes up with massive amounts of various potential ideas almost willy nilly, at near master levels, just like randomly. But the INTJ narrows down possibilities with a broad range of mission related studies to something more coherent and consistent with the mission. So that's why it's a meta unlock, not a natural progression. The ENTJ is a more teamwork focused um, leadership role, and the crusade against the Dark Ages unlocks my ENTJ factor a little bit, um, and so on. But as a man with these things, ISFP is a little lacking because I don't have a girlfriend, basically. What this means is the ISFP element of whimsical fun and um, embodied values or concrete relations with values and personally fun, whimsical things is a little starved. ESFJ as well, without a woman, is a little difficult because ESFJs are caretakers. But I have a little bit of that in me as well. Um, I developed it over a little while after learning how hard life can be, and then kind of like being like, oh, I should help other people who have hard lives too, and just like giving like a couple cigarettes to random hobos passing by and stuff like that. But a girlfriend would unlock that pretty hard, so that would be cool. And then I could like relax and like have like a concrete sort of domain of like INTP, ENTJ, INTJ work, and then a home life of ISFP and ESFJ. That would be a very rewarding experience as an INTP for me. Um, um, Now, I did a Freudian slip to Grok and initially asked ISFP and ENFJ. Um, I'm not sure about this, but ENFJ might be another unlock. So you have about 4 to 6 um, options, I think, for the INTP, basically. And they are known as the social chameleon. They are known to mask and use personas. Um, Instinctively, um, basically, and so on. And that ties into their multiple angles of analysis and interrelational webs, and sort of the INTP's mind's attempt to bind itself to something coherent. Um, um, Now the way that I liken this is you have Lord of Mysteries sequences 9 to 1, and you have Homath levels of thinking, the YouTube channel Homath, and his video levels of thinking, um, 1 to 9. And basically, if you take them and you compare them levels 1 to 9 and sequence 1 to 9, there's like um, there's a sort of um, you can see how there's a schizophrenic meltdown in Lord of Mysteries in a way, as a way to like see how it devolves. But if you compare sequence 9 to 1 with Homath's levels of thinking 1 to 9, the opposite direction, um, you can see how they merge as a way of showing mastery. And even in the HOMAS levels of thinking, and especially in Lord of Mysteries sequences, there's a duality of sorts to the development in both capacity for doing things and also instability in one actually succeeding at things. There's a possibility that you lose yourself and so on. And this is a very INTP thing, where the more adept they get, or the more meta they get, the more they lose themselves. But it's a drive for INTPs to do it, because that's part of who they actually are anyways. So it's a really weird, ironic sort of situation. But what I found is, by mapping INTP to ENTJ, then to ISFP to ESFJ, and having possible INTJ or ENFJ elements to them, as like a sort of sidelong projection or like parallel development throughout the process. As you unlock the first four stages, you stylize it in flavor as INTJ or ENFJ, possibly. I know I did INTJ, but ENFJ might be a useful one too. I'm not sure. That's ENFJ is the one that I'm not sure about. But I had a Freudian slip, and it probably means something, to be honest. Then you can remain stable throughout the process, basically. And the thing is, like, the way to describe it in another dual sense is Toby up to the reveal of his Sharingan from Naruto, and Kakashi, right? Toby is the Lord of Mysteries, and Kakashi is HOMAS levels of thinking. One is much more deceptive and reveals his depth, and one is much more laid back, but in the open, and they both are about Kakashi twists the fabric of reality in a targeted direction, and Toby twists reality around himself. So it's like and then the thing is, if you combine the two, then you have like a dual path ascension to godhood, basically. But it's a very weird path. And the thing is, it's possible for an INTP to do that. I don't want to say it's going to be the best or the perfectest, but it's a way of looking at the possibilities. Now, you might not get to this dual nature thing quite right away or something. It might not reveal itself to an INTP because they have a low resolution to begin with, and they're gradually processing the fog into something more solid. But as you do it, and you reach the meta levels of analysis and so on through experience, training, education, and theory, and practice, and learning, then it'll reveal itself nearer to the end to be what you were doing all along, basically. But it starts with adopting a mask on purpose instead of subconsciously for a given task. Now, you're probably going to do it subconsciously anyways, but being more aware of when you're doing it, and um, um, purposefully choosing a mask or persona or something for the purpose of the job at hand, like think like the prey to catch the prey, kind of, or think to, or think of it as like to catch the prey, you have to be the prey. Kind of thinking basically. But if you do it in a hostile context, you risk losing yourself in the identity because you're so malleable as an INTP, which is always the risk basically with this stuff. And some people keep themselves simple and stupid just to avoid losing themselves in the uh, fog and chaos of the complexity of what I've described now, or described before, just before this part of the video. And it's easy to get lost in the meta level analysis and so on. And the masks are a matter of almost. There's a video game that I played where you play as a shaman. You can play as a shaman, and they switch totems for different schools of magic. So if it's like healing magic or spirit magic, they have like a totem, or if it's elemental or war magic buffs, it's like a different totem, and they have like up to 4 of them. And whichever spell type they use, they have to hold a different totem in their hand. That's a very INTP way of looking at it, basically. And a totem is appropriate because basically what it means is that you're sort of channeling your INTP, grasping at the infinite, into a coherent, limited, but coherent methodology and set of principles to operate by, at least temporarily, or probably temporarily, that best aligns with the type of thinking needed for the job at hand. That's a very high level INTP thing to do, but a low level INTP needs to get practice trying it out themselves. And it's something you grow from chaos into order and structure, but also versatility and variability with effectiveness, as opposed to infinite chaos and mush. And basically, the INTP is the ultimate expression of a baby into adulthood, to the peak of adulthood mentally, in that way, where the baby's brain is like completely like it can pick up on anything, but it doesn't have any it can't. The baby is completely aware of their surroundings because the brain hasn't killed off the unnecessary routes of development and neural pathways needed to create a context. And then as the baby grows into an adult, the unused parts of the brain die off. And this is why babies learn language better than adults. But basically, the unused parts of the brain die off, and a structure emerges that is sculpted in the brain for purposes and tasks, and the parts of the brain that are used are stronger and grown more and so on, and develop. So it's like, and there is such a thing as brain plasticity, and I think you can regrow parts of the brain a little bit at least. that have been starved a bit into something a little more strong, but not by a lot. Like you can't regrow your like if you take a like there's a guy who lost part of his brain by getting like a railroad spike thrown through his brain and he survived. You know, he doesn't regrow the grapefruit sized chunk of brain he lost or something like that. So it's not Wolverine factor healing. But you know, if you get rusty, you can come back to it and remember the stuff, basically. Um, INTPs are the ultimate expression of this path, from the helplessness to the mastery of multiple subjects. Um, but it's a longer road than most. Now, the thing is, this unlocks something that most people don't really have that much access to, which is when you master 90%, let's say 6 different fields, you have a versatility that if you mastered 1 or 2 fields, you wouldn't have. It just takes longer to get there, basically. And what this means is you have a larger end game repertoire of all the things you need to do to hard counter any problems. You are more able to provide 90% of exactly what hard counters an enemy's tactics on the fly. Um, they might have a grand strategy that they outplan you on to the end and so on, but then you can flip the script by changing strategies completely, and like the entire dynamic of the game shifts and they get overwhelmed and they can't adapt to your level of fluidity and so on. You can overwhelm them that way. So that's something to think about. And it really is like you can fight like a wolf or something, let's say, and then let's say someone's a bear or something like that, right? Or no, actually, yeah. Let's say someone's a cougar and you're a wolf, right? The cougar beats the wolf when the wolf's alone. Let's say they single you out and they get you when you're normally in a pack when you're alone, and you're like, oh no, what do? I'm gonna lose. And then you fight like a bear, and you can do that as an INTP. And like the cougar gets overwhelmed by the bear. That's how it looks. Now everyone has a shadow function, a shadow side to themselves, and so on. But the INTP is more explicit in being able to activate and switch to all these shadow functions and so on. They're much better at it, typically speaking. So the versatility is what's important. And one of the ways to look at it is sort of like being Solid Snake or Big Boss or Naked Snake versus all the bosses in Metal Gear Solid that are better at something in a way, but you're so versatile and good at your versatility that you can outperform them with your moveset. Um, and this also ties to the Sharingan thing from Naruto and so on and so on. Another way of looking at it, in a way, is kind of like Bleach's Ichigo, where he's got like, oh, what is it? He's got like Shinigami, Hollow, um, Quincy, and Fullbring. You know what I mean? And none of them are good enough to be Yuhabak. But like when you combine all of the 4 different strategies and you blind him to what you're going to do at any given moment, you can beat him. So that's one way to look at it. That's another way to look at it, basically. Now, if you're going to Avatar Mask, between Toby or Lord of Mysteries and Kakashi and Homas levels of thinking, I think your default should be Kakashi. He's more INTP, ENTJ, ESFJ, and Toby is more ISFP, or INTJ, ISFP. He started as an INTP, or INTJ, sorry, but he wears an ISFP mask. So I don't know if my personal story of development is exactly the right one to do, but or my personal relations to it, but that's how I came to the information I came to, basically. Um, as for ENFJ, I don't know if that's helpful. Um, I imagine it potentially is. But the INTP to ENTJ to ISFP to ENSFJ, and running a side game of INTJ to develop these with a possible career path is actually kind of important, because the architect INTJ isn't natural to the INTP's development path necessarily, but if you force yourself to play for the long game, and you don't have to plan literally everything out, but you have to have a rough framework of like an overall plan and so on. Like a sort of like if you want to be an effective agent as an INTP, what I found is I basically borrowed INTJ planning from uh, the ether to possibly have done something that is magnificent and will ultimately end the Dark Ages in the West. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's kind of the sense I get in some sense. But I did that by tying myself to people that I trust and bending my will and focus on things that pertain to it. So the goal and mission and task needs to be broad enough where an INTP can freely study everything, and basically whatever you're picking up almost certainly has some sort of relevance on some level. And you can emphasize or focus the information onto how it helps with the mission or task or journey or quest or whatever you want to call it. But it's not so restrictive that you have to think in obsessively about only the a full planning out of the task. Um, so yeah, and the ENFJ is really just a throwaway that I came up with because of my Freudian slip. It might have been. Might not even be relevant. It might have just been I was thinking INTJ, like the NT, ENTJ, INTJ, INTP kind of thing. I was like, oh, ENFJ. Might have been a Freudian slip in that regards too, instead of it might be secretly relevant. But I'm not sure if it's totally the case that you have to do it this way. Now, the INTP and the INTJ are reasonably similar in some ways, but instead of introverted thinking and extroverted intuition, it's extroverted intuition and into in and introverted thinking. Um, so yeah, yeah. But that's the INTJ is my personal um, unique, possibly co-development with my INTP, ENTJ, ISFP, ESFJ path that I kind of chose on purpose, basically. I don't know if it'll help other INTPs, but it's certainly been my life path. So I just wanted to share my personal experience on that one. Um, most of the stuff I've said up until I mentioned mission or task or quest or whatever, like a long arc plan, even if it's a rough one, is applicable to all INTPs in some sense. So maybe they find a different Myers Briggs to long term, side parallel development journey on. Um, but yeah. And this is the advantage of being and this is like how do I put this? Well, this is just my, like, like what I mentioned with that is just my personal journey, basically. I have a feeling I'm going to be an ENFJ, and I can develop my ISFP and ESFJ better when I get a girlfriend, basically. So the INTP ENTJ with sidetrack side like along a parallel track INTJ is very much a hyper masculine thing, whereas ISFP and ENFJ and ESFJ is very anima coded for a man. Um, uh, I don't know what that is with women exactly, but I think there's probably a very large sex difference between men and women generally, anyways, in the MBTI. So I don't think too many people will have to worry about it too much. But I'm trusting any woman that sees this to figure out their own development path as an INTP with this stuff in mind, and potential emphasis shifts based on them being a woman, and trusting they can decipher this with their own lived experience informing them, especially as an INTP.